Hello everyone, and welcome back to COSS, our course on commercial open source software startups and how to spin them off from university. This is the fourth lecture in the first of three parts of the lectures of this course about software businesses in general. We previously discussed the software industry, what software products are, and how software vendors, one particular player in the industry, function. Now we will look at the underlying business models of such software vendors, from which usually software startups are culled. I say business models here, but what it really will be about is a discussion of the business model canvas and hence the different components of a business model. So we will, given what's possible here, not really go into patterns or templates for business models as a whole, and we will leave that to the business model generation book. Rather, we will look at the levers and the different things and components of what you do and can do. And maybe at some later point of time add a lecture on patterns or templates of business models. So what is a business model? Well, it's a description of how an organization creates, delivers, and captures value. That's a pretty general thing to say. The key here really is, in economic terms, the creation of value. So something that is new, that did not exist without your work and that customers are willing to pay for. And then the capture of that value, meaning someone actually makes money, usually, off it, or captures the value of that innovative or otherwise creation. And so in between there's a delivery, but the core is creation and capture of value. And since this is a model, we will also talk about the relationships of the components, because we need to dig into the depth of that model or that description and understand its components. Otherwise, we can't create new ones, which usually consist of refiguring things, inventing new components, putting them together. Since it's a model, it has to be instantiated. So a model is kind of static, but it comes to life by people actually turning that model into action. So it's a blueprint for a company, how to operate, but without the actual operations of that company, also meaning the execution of the business model, there is no business. So we will use the business model canvas to describe and discuss business models, and you know it by now. It's got these 9 different components that are laid out in primarily the business model generation book, but now many other textbooks as well. To that basic canvas, these 9 components and their interactions, I have added here to illustrate a value creation side and a value capture side. The value creation happens on the left, where there is the creation of what customers actually are paying for, the production or the operations. And then on the right, there's the capture, the going to market with a product or value proposition and generating revenues of it. In the middle, nicely in the middle, is the actual value proposition, which ties these things together. Value creation serves to create the value proposition or products, and value capture serves to turn those into revenues or income for the company. And the original textbook does not really label these two sides as value creation and value capture, though given how neatly this canvas can be split in the middle, I imagine this was on the minds of Osterwalder and Pigneux. So we have these 9 components with essential linchpin, the value proposition. Value capture, how you make money, is the customer segments or market segments, channels, customer relationships and revenue streams, and the value creation is about key partners, key activities, key resources, and the underlying cost structure of creating that value. And now in the remainder of this lecture, we will mostly go over these different components and discuss them in particular from a software vendor's perspective. So, as stated, the core or the essence or at the center of any business model arguably is the value proposition. What it is that you are proposing to someone, your customers, would create value for them, and that justifies, that's the rationale for the existence of your company. Your goal, your purpose in life as a company is to deliver value to customers, and that's where everything else derives from. So the value proposition is, well, the value of something to customers, so they buy, they pay for it, typically turned into a product or a service. So value is pretty abstract, and hence value proposition sounds a bit of abstract. It is the relieving of a pain or the creating of a benefit or gain for a customer. And it becomes tangible as you can it into something you can call a product or a service. And so by way of turning a somewhat abstract idea of value into a tangible product, you have something to sell, and that's what customers pay for. What that product or service is can vary drastically. You can argue that there are at least these 2 dimensions to it, that the value or the product has some quantitative gain or benefit to customers or some qualitative. And quantitative means your product really speeds things up, or it's just cheaper than the competitors but needed by customers. It could be breaking qualitative barriers by making life much more convenient or really being novel and intriguing, relieving boredom and what have you. So value proposition can be quite broadly, and usually that's what we will talk about when we'll talk about startups later. It is an intriguing and not so easy process to figure out what the actual value is that customers are willing to pay for. The business model generation book and the customer development book structure to help you understand value proposition better, structured into these different aspects. Are you relieving a pain of a customer, potential customer, or you're giving them a gain? It's pain is saving costs or making something run smoothly that otherwise would draw a lot of attention. And gain means improving significantly some output so that they are deliver better quality to their own customers, or you open up a new market. And these authors also distinguish between, are you solving a problem or fulfilling a need, where a problem is probably more rational while a need is more emotional, like removing boredom. In the end, this is just a simple model of pains and gains, problems and needs, and it may be very unique to your business what it is that is the actual value to customers. Sooner or later, however, you have to quantify that gain or pain, and that would be, for example, by how often does this problem occur. Or if it occurs, so not just frequency, if it occurs, how intense, what's the amplitude, if you will, of the problem or the gain or pain to the customer. And such quantification is important because ultimately the pricing of your product or service will depend on that. You need to put numbers to it. You need to quantify things. Otherwise, you're flying blind. You don't know how much to charge. You don't know how to manage it. You need to put numbers to it. You need to model ultimately what it is that you're doing and to understand your product and know what you can ask your customers for. So value proposition is at the center of a business model and the business model canvas. And now let's assume you have that value proposition already and you know how to create it. We'll talk about that later. But for now, assume you know how to create it. How do you actually sell it and capture its value, meaning the value that you created is not escaping and somebody else benefits from it. In economic textbooks, value capture is actually usually called value appropriation. So that is a little bit of an academic term, a fancy term. Practitioners tend to talk about value capture rather than appropriation. It's maybe a bit nicer or easier to remember. Value capture is the comprehensive process of deriving that revenue stream from products or services that you sell that incorporate a value proposition to customers in a market or a market segment. And you reach those customers through a channel and you manage your relationship with those customers to keep them and to grow them. And these different components, revenue stream, market segments, value channels, and customer relationship make up the value capture side of the business model canvas, plus the value proposition. And every business model is different in that these components are made concrete or specific in different ways, and they interact in different ways. So this is different by each business model, and then it is also different by how you structure your market. You will see that markets are split into segments, and there's variations. There will be variation on these different components depending on what market segment you're selling to. So let's take a look at that. In the original business model canvas, to the right, there is the component of customer segment. I don't quite like that term because you don't really segment customers, you segment markets. And so all your customers are in the market of your product. And then as you split a market into ideally disjoint, meaning mutually exclusive segments that don't overlap, you also split your overall set of customers into these different subsets. That's meant by segments. So it's not customers, you're segmenting a market. And hence a market segment is a cohesive cluster of similar customers from your overall set of customers. So the market itself is just the cluster of customers that somehow react to your value proposition. And then as you segment it, you find clusters within that overall set of customers which are somehow more cohesive. And it is important that you understand what ties a cluster together, because then you can customize your value proposition, your general value proposition to that particular cluster. So this implies that this one business model canvas exists, or this business model exists in many different variations that are all somehow similar, since you have a core value proposition, but then that value proposition varies by segment, because each cluster or group of customers that you can clearly distinguish from another cluster, cohesive cluster of customers, obviously is somewhat different than that other cluster, meaning they have somewhat different needs. Again, in total, it's the same value proposition that appeals to your overall market, but looking at the market segment and the respective customer groups in each market segment, there is variation. And that means you have to vary your business model to serve that particular segment best. So you can effectively calculate backwards from your market segmentation through the whole through business model canvas as you deliver your value proposition, your customized value proposition to the needs of that particular customer segment. That's what you can see illustrated here, as if there were multiple business models on top of each other. These are really variations of the same underlying more general business model. Now we are looking at customers, and you don't really care whether you are selling to someone called John or Jane. You simply want to sell to them, and for that you need to understand the customer segment, and then at each customer, which often in the case of enterprise software at least is a company, you need to understand the people inside those customer companies. And again, it's not Jane or Joe, John or Jane you care about. It is the type of people you need to understand so that you can sell effectively. And here people are talking about personas, to abstract from John and Jane into basically an underlying archetypal person. And these archetypal people in customer companies can be quite different because they play different roles. So for the most obvious one is the user of your product. And the user may have an important say or may not have an important say on whether the product is bought. The user's manager may have more to say in terms of your sales success than the user, because maybe, they're obviously the superior of the user and maybe more powerful. But even the user's manager may not be the one who's holding the purse strings. That might be a separate person, the CIO, for example, or CTO, or whoever, the so-called economic buyer. We and everyone else uses this generic term economic buyer because you don't know who's holding the purse strings. But it is clearly a distinct persona often than the actual user or the manager of the user. Finally, so user and user manager, they want something. They need new software to make life better. The user wants it to be nice and easy to use. The user's manager wants to squeeze out more from their users perhaps. And the economic buyer wants it to be cheap but understands the business wants some software. There are also detractors, possibly people who don't want the company, your potential customer company, to buy. And more often than not, it may be the IT department which has to operate the software. And if they don't like operating the software, then they will veto its purchase. So they might have a veto right in a purchasing decision. And all of these types of people or personas are archetypal in that they have different needs and need to be talked to in a sales process in a different way. So whenever a company thinks about its markets, the market segments, and the customer companies or customers in a market segment, it has to drill even deeper if it wants to make an actual sale and understand the people, the archetypal people or personas in those potential customer companies. So it's a breakdown from the overall market that matches or that's there for your value proposition, all the way down to personas in a given potential customer company in some market segment. And so you can see it here, how maybe if you're selling cars, you have very different customers who you're selling to. You have the direct car buyers you need to appeal to, but you may have that subsidiaries or the dealerships which are the car sellers, or at least who are the in between the automotive vendor and the car buyers. You segment your market, for example, by type of car, and then as you have a particular market segment like those in the market for a truck, you have different personas who will be driving the truck, who will be managing the drivers, who are the buyers, who have to maintain the truck, all of that. So you need to understand all of these things if you want to be successful in selling your product. How do you reach people? How do you reach those personas in customer companies, in customers, in market segments of your overall market? Well, you reach them by way of what the business model canvas calls channels. A channel is a conduit, a way of reaching the elements of a market segment, that is the potential customer companies in a market segment. The channel used to be physical. These days it's more often digital than not, but channels have a different there are different purposes for channels. So one is to just communicate to people. Another one is to effectively sell to them. So communication comes first, but then as you might sell to them, that could be a different channel. And once you have sold to customers or turned leads or turned potential customers into actual customers, you also still have to deliver to them. So you need a distribution channel. This can be structured, so again, you can have small models that help you understand the situation. If you have a physical product, then you also can communicate it physically about it by putting flyers and coupons into people's mailboxes, and they still have to go to the supermarket and pick up the food. So that's all physical. In software, it's all pretty digital, or much of it is digital. Not only is the actual product and product delivery, the distribution channel, usually digital, but even the communication channel, reaching enterprises, reaching people in enterprises, is often digital. Not exclusively. No? If you go to a fair or some physical event, you go there in person. So that is still part of the mix. But a lot in the software industry has turned digital, completely digital by now. And so here are more examples of digital channels, in particular distribution channels, how you might deliver your product to customers. They might buy it from your, sell it and deliver it from a web store, from an app store. And you might have retailers. So there still exist digital retailers, people who go in between, the so-called middleman, even though maybe increasingly they go away and you have a direct to sale. Still, those distinction is valid. In a direct channel sale, you directly sell to the customer, and you do make the maximum profit because there is nobody taking a cut in between. If, however, there's an indirect channel sale, meaning there are middlemen or middlewomen, middle people, they will try to take a cut. They may make your life easier, so you want them for that reason perhaps, or they may be in a position that they are required to be used, in case of which I'm sure they will take a big cut of your potential revenues and profits. But they may make your life easier. So if you're small and a startup and it's not easy to do a direct sale, maybe you need an indirect channel sale. But increasingly with software, of course, everything is direct to something and the middle person is being cut out. So you know who your customers are and you know how to reach them. And now you want to sell to them. And that means you're building relationships with them. And it's not just the initial sale. Once you have someone who could potentially be a customer, yes, you first have to sell something to them, but then you want to keep them. And you want to potentially grow them in terms of revenue. So getting customers, keeping them, so not losing them, and growing them is important to maintaining healthy revenues. For the initial how to sell to them, please refer to our personas discussion. I want to focus now here on the actual sales process. We touched on it in the last lecture already, which in a bit more highbrow way is called customer acquisition. So customer acquisition is usually viewed in terms of a so-called sales funnel. In a sales funnel, you build up a large number of potential customers who you make aware of your products, and then you try to convert them over time or as fast as possible into paying customers. The problem with the sales funnel is that as you try to pull in so-called leads, meaning potential customers, you might be losing them because they are just not interested for whatever reason. Maybe your product is too expensive. Maybe it doesn't do what they actually want. So it's a multi-stage process where there is a loss at each stage. And of course, the best process is where the loss is kept small. The stages are creating initial awareness. That's what marketing people do. They advertise your product. They have a nice website. They go to fairs and inform people about your products. They get their business card or their email address, meaning the potential customer somehow reacted. There was a blip, a signal, which indicated that maybe this person who now just got aware of your product is actually potentially interested. So that turns them into so-called qualified leads. After which, the marketing folks will typically hand over their list of qualified leads to the sales organization, which will try to which will possibly call up the qualified lead, who will work on them, trying to get them to take a closer look at the actual product. And in the discovery stage, the potential customer just looked at the product and thought, maybe that's good for us. While in the evaluation phase, the vendor is trying to get them to really take a close look. So that might imply you have to show up at the customer and demonstrate your product. And if things go well, or at least it used to be like that, you would have to develop a prototype with them or have a proof of concept evaluation. And then if everything's green, meaning the customer thinks that the product does what they need and would serve them well, the customer has an intent to buy. Intent doesn't mean sale yet. Intent means that they think it's worth that time. They maybe made a return on investment calculation and think, yes, this would be a good thing to have. But still, many things can go wrong. Still, the price could be too high. Still, some key feature could be missing. Or maybe they just don't like you or your company, or you have the wrong partners or the wrong reputation, whatever. Things can still go wrong. Even if after evaluation there's positive intent, it doesn't necessarily lead to a purchase decision. For example, the IT department could veto it, right? Think back to personas. So, but if you have good salespeople, ultimately the customer will be convinced and will buy. Hence, the customer acquisition process has delivered what it was supposed to, acquired a customer. As you might have guessed now, this customer acquisition process can be laborious, and you can actually put some math to it because they're numbers. Salespeople not only various numbers involved, but one is the leaky sales funnel and how leads drop out. And all of that creates an increasing cost for acquiring a customer. So the so-called CAC, customer acquisition cost, is a key metric for many businesses, certainly for software vendors, because that is the cost you have to acquire a customer before they even make the first payment. Obviously, you want to make more money off them, generate more revenue than the customer acquisition costs you in the beginning. So let's take a look at this key metric. Let's assume your marketing people go to a trade show, so they have a booth, the people cost money, but they collect a lot of business cards. That would be a lead. So here the assumption is with all that cost divided by the number of business cards they get, that's the cost per lead, and that's the starting point of 100% of leads that they acquired. And so let's assume I'm calculating backwards from one sale that we look at 10 such leads, so 10 potential customers. So then we know the cost for that 10 customers was 1,000 euro. Now comes an evaluation, and so that's already step 3 maybe in that sales funnel, and only 2 companies survive the evaluation. 8 companies, or 8 leads, I wanted to say, 8 leads figure that this product is not for them. So evaluations could be expensive. Yeah? You have to send your salespeople repeatedly to the potential customer company. Maybe you have to do demos, etc., etc. So I just put a comparatively high number, perhaps, of the cost for that stage here of 10,000. And finally, there is the sale. And of those 2 who evaluated positively for they want that product, only one made it past the purchasing process. So in one case, a detractor derailed the actual purchasing decision from the client's perspective, derailed your sale from your perspective. And let's assume that that cost 2,000 euro to go through that process. So then we know with one remaining customer at the end, but all of those who came before and were lost, the total cost of acquiring that one customer is 13,000 euro here. So this is a rough number. Obviously, it can vary significantly how much it costs. Such a number only makes sense in the context of enterprise software and comparatively high sales prices. It wouldn't make sense if Microsoft needed that much money to sell your copy of Office. But the process itself is actually very basic, and it's not just sales in general that works like that. For example, acquiring developers is a key activity of software vendors, and they have equal numbers and costs associated with it. So you need to think these things through from a financial perspective. It's actually a pretty accurate number. Between 5,000 and 15,000 euro it costs a company today to acquire a good developer. Acquiring a customer is a first step. It's an important step, and as we will see in a bit, customer acquisition cost is as already noted, a key metric. But once you have customers, you want to keep them. Because it is so expensive to acquire them, it's much cheaper to keep them. But you need to work on keeping them because, if they drop out, if they are unhappy, they will drop out. Keeping them, however, is much cheaper than acquiring them anew. First of all, the customer already committed to using your product, so they are locked in, arguably. Hence, their switching costs to an alternative which have to be added to the price of that alternative. So if you lock them in nicely and the switching costs are high, then this will be a detriment for them to leave you. Of course, that's not a main reason you should be working on. You should be foremost working on delivering a great product so that customers are happy because there's great value to them in your product. But really, again, next to these two key things, keeping them happy and locking them in between, there are lots of techniques and practices how you can increase their happiness by way of loyalty programs or added benefits that you can give them, what have you. So product managers can be quite creative there. Here's an illustration of what happens if you don't keep your customers. Losing customers is called customer attrition or churn. So churn, customer churn, is the percentage of customers you lose in a given time period. And then the inverse, customer lifetime, is 1 divided by churn. And it's really hard to maintain a business with a high churn rate. So look at these illustrating numbers. If you have a churn of 20%, meaning you lose 20% of your customers after 1 month, then after a year, from only 7% of your original customer base are left. After 2 years, nothing. So to fight a churn of 20%, you have to be in high gear in terms of acquiring customers, and hence costs of that need to be low. Look at the other side of this. Happy, healthy customers with a churn of 1%. After a year, you lost 10% or 11% with a time period of 1 month. You lost 10%. And that's much easier to compensate by new customer acquisition than, say, the 93% or a 20% churn. So keeping churn low is key to maintaining your customers, and the cost of keeping churn low is much lower again than the initial customer acquisition. So focus on keeping churn low as if you can. In addition to acquiring new customers and keeping them, you may also want to grow them. And not only do you want to grow the overall number of customers, that's obvious. No, you want to grow the revenue generated from one particular customer because they already are a customer. So again, you don't have that new customer acquisition cost, but you may be able to sell them more. What can you sell them? Well, you can upsell your customers, which means that you sell them more advanced functionality or more seats or more cores. It depends on your product, what it is that you can sell them, a higher performing, but of course then also more expensive product. Sometimes you can cross-sell them. If you have a portfolio of products and there are many different similar products or related products, complementary products, then maybe you can sell them the other thing as well. If you already sold them on Windows, maybe you can sell them Word. If you sold them Word, maybe you can sell them Excel too, meaning there are complementary products and you have all your customer data. Maybe you can sell them more and make more money that way. The inverse of, or the counterpart to the cost of acquiring customer is, not the counterpart actually, the comprehensive picture of looking at customers is done by a metric called the customer lifetime value. So the customer lifetime value is the total amount of profits generated from a particular customer. So again, profits meaning revenues, the money you make of them, minus the costs they cost you. And the customer lifetime value obviously needs to be positive, otherwise you don't have a business. If the expenses for acquiring, keeping and growing a customer are more than the money you make of them, you'll be bankrupt in no time. So the lifetime value is again that profit over time in today's currency. How do you calculate it? Well, you look at the average lifetime from customer churn, for example. You know how long the average customer is with you. So these are averages we're calculating. Then you look at each time period and look at how much revenue generate and how much this offsets the costs, in particular the variable costs associated with serving that particular customer for that particular, or the average customer for that average revenue with these average costs. And since these are money flowing in the future, you actually need to discount it, meaning bring it into today's currency. The further out some revenue or some profits are, the less valuable they are. If you have them today, they are more valuable, so you discount them by the inflation. So then that lets you create the customer lifetime value. The costs, so the revenues are usually pretty well understood. The costs are sometimes harder to calculate, but you just get averages anyway from your acquisition process, the customer retention, meaning keeping customers, and the potential upselling and cross-selling activities. And in these costs, you only include the variable costs for a particular customer. You don't include what we will see in a bit, the fixed cost, which means that you still need to have a ton of profit here, and that is a substantial one to cover your fixed costs. But again, we'll come to that in a bit. So customer lifetime value should be much larger than the customer acquisition costs. And this simplifying heuristic is such because customer acquisition cost dominates the other costs. Is so much higher than retention and growth. So that's why it stands in for costs, at least the majority of costs. And again, specifics vary by domain. So we are still on the value capture side. We talked about how the value proposition is communicated and sold to customers and market segments, and how revenues are generated. But we haven't talked about revenues yet. So what are revenues? Well, it's the income received from a customer, the money they pay. It does not include the costs. That would be, if we include the costs or subtract the costs, that would be profits. In industry, various terms are being used. Sometimes we hear about a revenue source. So that usually means a customer, or sometimes all the customers who bought a particular product. So then the product. That's where the money, the revenues come from. And then you can aggregate it. So because there's a time component to it, you have a source, but each time period there's a new input from that source or output from that source. You have a stream of incoming revenue payments from a source over time. And you aggregate them, not just one customer or one product. You aggregate them from single customer to product to market segment, depending on how you want to look at your revenue streams. The purpose of looking at your revenue streams is to understand your business. Sometimes you don't really understand it. Sometimes you don't know what's changing on the grounds. So in companies you have something called business intelligence, which is its own enterprise software. It would be business intelligence software, which lets you analyze all your revenue streams. You can drill down into where is which money being made, in what demographics, or in what particular location, city or county or state are you making what amount of money. All of these analyses have become possible thanks to business intelligence software, and so you can understand what's working and what's not working. As you sell a product, you need to figure out what to charge customers. And you may think that's an art, but it can also be a science. So the price is what customers pay, but you have to structure it. So you have to somehow define that unit of product or service and then create variations of it. And that way of looking at it, that one seat or one user license versus 5 user licenses versus unlimited user licenses, all of this is a structure on top of the basic unit of your product or service that you're selling. Your goal in defining a price is to maximize, obviously, the revenues you're getting from all your customers. So the big picture is, what's the total revenue you have? The problem is, so there's a textbook answer to how much you should be charging, what your price should be. And that is, of course, for each customer, exactly how much it is worth to them. So a customer looks at your product, your value proposition, and says, okay, if we buy this, then we have these and that benefits, and that will be so and so much money to us. They do a return on investment calculation where the investment is buying your product. And then your price should be exactly that value your customers derive from your product minus €1 or so. And you can probably spot the problem right away. First of all, you don't know what that value is because you don't know that return on investment calculation that your customers do. And they would be fools to share it with you most of the time. And then it's different by each customer. So you would have to charge each customer a different price, which may or may not be possible. So it's called price discrimination. So there are different techniques for figuring out what's the value to a particular customer, and then structuring your products or how they appear in front of customers in such a way that you can charge different customers different prices. Usually you can charge different customer groups different prices because you vary the product in such a way that they look differently to customers but appeal to different groups of customers with who see a higher value in your product than others. It's called price discrimination, where in the ideal case you set prices specific to a customer. This is actually pretty common on the web, in that, say, Amazon tries to give you individual prices. They can't overdo it because if you talk to your friend and your friend got a better deal than you do, you will be annoyed. But they are always fiddling with whatever cents and special deals and what have you. Anyway, you if you can't price discriminate on a by customer basis, you find proxies for that, how you reach them, how you segment, and how you frame a product for that segment. The key takeaway here is to avoid the beginner's mistake of pricing based on costs. So the beginner looks at their product and says, well, how much did it cost us? And now we should charge at least that plus some markup. Markup over costs is a loser's game, or means you're in a really tough market with not a lot of differentiation between different competing companies. So the prices, the costs to you, the vendor, are very obvious to customers, and they can squeeze you on prices and get you close to your own costs. Obviously, that's not a nice market to be in. Try to be very different from your customers, from your competitors, and clearly communicate your value and see how much that value is actually valued to your customers, and try to get there. So as I said, try to identify the basic unit of your product and then try to sell as many units by a price. So your individual sales revenue is the price of a unit times the number of units in the most simplest term of your product or service sold. Obviously, there will be increasing discounts as numbers go up. That's why we sometimes have very complicated or complex price lists, but that is still the principles hold here. So we talked about value proposition and then how that value is captured by the vendor to be profitable. And that was the right side of the business model canvas. Now we need to look at how we create that value in the first place, meaning how do we design, develop, build a product or a service, how do we operate it, and so forth. So value creation is the comprehensive process of creating and operating your product and service. And of course, that's never standing still. So that's the initial creation when the company gets going, but after that it's evolution and extension of what you've been doing. The business model canvas gives us a couple of components here: key partners, key activities, key resources, cost structure, and so forth. And we need to take a look at that. The key partners of your organization are those which support you in your business. You strike a deal with them, and they deliver something or provide something to you that is important for you to create your enriched value proposition to your own customers. So you need those key partners, for example, to sell into a particular market. Then there would be sales partners. So here's a rundown of these partnerships. So they could be suppliers. If you're building a complex product, you can't really build everything from scratch. An example is Apple outsourcing much of its development or the development of components, at least the physical components, to Foxconn. Foxconn doesn't do the software, so Apple still keeps things separate. But suppliers are key partners to your business. Strategic alliances. Sometimes to deliver a product requires partners. So SAP needs its consulting ecosystem to successfully deliver the value to its customers. And sometimes it's joint business development where you have complementary products like Intel and the computer manufacturers. So Intel started the highly successful Intel Inside marketing campaign at some point of time. Sometimes it's to learn things. Daimler actually owned 10% of Tesla. Daimler Chrysler at that time, I believe, owned 10% of Tesla at some point of time due to some initial investment. Perhaps to learn or not, we don't know. I think they are out by now. So such partnerships are key. If your partners have something that you don't, but that you really need. But they can also be fickle. Success factors in making a partnership work are understanding each other's core value proposition and how your partner's value proposition fits into yours. And you should obviously not be competing for the same customers. There's just a number of so many different reasons why it could go wrong. My favorite one is that the companies are just so different in their culture and operations that simply working with each other doesn't work out. A typical example is a small startup, a nimble startup, which wants to work with a large company. The thinking of people in large companies is so different from a startups. The time frames in which they think is so different that the startup may have run 3 laps around the track already while the large company is just getting started. It's a tanker. It can be a tanker. And hence, you will just never reach a deal and act fast enough, say, on joint opportunities because, well, the large company is too slow. And hence, there are no joint opportunities because you never get to the finish line together. So be careful who you partner with and make sure that the interests are aligned. Next to key partners, there are key resources. So key partners are, of course, legal entities who can act in their own right. Key resources are inanimate. They are not legally acting in any sense. A key resource is an important asset that you need for your business, and it is somehow competitively differentiating you. Others don't have it like that, or most of the time don't have it like that. From the economic textbooks, it's clear there are 3 core categories of resources. They are called materials, capital, and labor. Materials can be split further into tangible and intangible materials. The tangible resources, materials are really physical things like parts to a production. If you're building a house, it's maybe the wooden beams or the concrete or the stones you build your house from. Could also be, And so you usually own them, or you lease them, or you pay for them, etc. In software in particular, intellectual property is an important material. And we've discussed that, and we will revisit it as part of products. Intellectual property could be the copyright to code, patents, trademarks, etc. Could be contracts, positions you hold with other people. And these intellectual properties you invent yourself, or you buy them, you acquire them from universities, for example, or strategic partners. So these are the inanimate materials, tangible or intangible, that you can build a business from. Separate from these raw inputs to create a value or create a product or service for customers, you need capital, so money, but in a more structured way. These are the financial resources to keep you going, to pay your salaries, to pay your factories or your computing resources, etc. And this is the land, of course, if you're a startup, of venture capital, but in more traditional terms, you can acquire bank loans, etc. And finally, the third type of resource to understand is labor, or as I like to say, people applied over time, because labor is not just people, it's people over time. You need to understand that time is a key part here, and that can be a key resource to your business, because if you don't have good developers, for example, if you don't have good salespeople, good product managers, then you may not be successful. So the quality of the work that people do is important, but also how much of it you can have. That's the time aspect of it. That's why we calculate in person month, even though that abstraction is dicey, obviously. And so you draw on people by being on good terms with your local university. And maybe you can globally source some remote work. So then next to key resources and key partners, there are the core processes or the key activities that you need to master that make up your business. So this is what you, the vendor, the startup, needs to be able to do well. There's some obvious examples. If you're a software vendor, obviously you should be good at software development, though conceivably if you are able to cut it down to somehow production, you could outsource it. So some well-known examples from other domains, say Nike is well known for really being the designers but not the manufacturers of shoes that they sell you for a lot of money. But for a software vendor and certainly for a SaaS company, it's these two key activities you need to master, which is understanding your business domain and understanding the domain, the application domain that provides where the value is provided to your customers, and then being able to operate that at scale in the cloud. These are two separate, related but separate engineering activities you need to master. And if you consider something like this key, then you should not outsource it. It could also be, of course, your sales and processes, the way of raising funds, etc. So next to these three key resources, partners, and activities, you have the underlying cost structure that you need to define, understand, and model so that you have a grasp or a handle on your value creation side of the business model. So the cost structure of a business is, well, a model of the costs, the expenses you have that you need to operate and scale out your business. And here, this is not a business school course, but as you notice, I'm covering some basics. Here you need to distinguish between, for a software vendor, distinguish between the fixed costs and the variable costs that your business incurs. And the fixed cost is that cost which is always there, even if you had no business, if you had no customers. So if you're a startup and you're developing your product, but the product isn't ready yet, so you have no customers, your fixed costs, that's what the cost of your business right now is. And mostly that's then salaries, for example, of your development organization. If, however, you start having customers and adding a new customer creates some additional costs, for example, you have to pay for a bit more computing resources now because you're a SaaS vendor, a cloud service provider, then that's the variable cost that varies by adding one more customer. You have a slightly increased costs, and that's the variable. That difference, that delta, is the variable costs of your business. And you typically find that in the income statement, where closer to the revenues are the variable costs, and further down are the fixed costs of your business. You can see here how, as you sell larger numbers, units of your product, you really want to get variable costs down to be more profitable, and scale up fixed costs because this way you'll be more profitable. If you only sell one item ever, then it's all variable cost anyway, then it's 100% of it. In software development, software vendors, I wanted to say, whether a cloud service provider or not, you typically have as fixed costs the actual software development. If you're a SaaS company, you also have the operations of your service as a fixed cost mostly. But then you have variable costs, and that's of course customer support. There's some fixed cost components to it, but it really scales nicely with more customers. No customers, no need to support anyone. More customers, more need for support. And then also some additional operations costs. The trick in being a successful SaaS vendor, of course, is to keep the variable aspects of the operations costs for operating the software in the cloud as low as possible. But there usually will be some, because having one more customer will consume a little bit more of computing resources, and if not, you need to send in the customer success people to make sure that your customers are using your product and are generating some computing resource consumption that make it into your variable costs. So in this lecture, I really talked about the components of a business model, not really the business model, or templates or types of business models. That is, of course, where your homework comes in and where writing a business plan comes in. The business model generation book has lots of templates or patterns of business models to look at to get an idea of how these components that I just discussed of the business model canvas fit together, interact, etc. Here, at the end of this lecture, I want to give you a very basic idea of how to look at different businesses and how they affect the components in the business model canvas. I'm using a famous paper by Hagel and Singer, who looked at companies and classified them into 3 dominant categories, if you will, whether they are strong on product innovation, customer relationships, or infrastructure management type of a company. So if you are a product innovator, then what you're doing is coming up with new and innovative products and beating your competition because your product is more innovative, better, more interesting. If you're a customer relationship management company, then your business is in high customer intimacy, meaning knowing your customers really well, talking to them, making them feel good. That is the distinguishing characteristic. And if you're an infrastructure company, or management company, then you're probably in a domain where there was substantial capital investment into getting some infrastructure going. Think the original telephone lines or the original railways. These days, it's obviously all the fiber in the ground and the data centers. These things created a lot of costs, and maintaining them also creates lots of costs, specifically fixed costs. So it's essential then that you achieve so-called economies of scale, meaning lots of customers to recoup for the high fixed costs. So again, the economics are that if you're a product innovator, you can charge a premium price, and what's key is speed to innovation. If you're a customer relationship company, you're doing well on customer relationship, then acquiring your customer may have cost a lot of money, but it's key that you keep them. So you retain them, you grow them, and hence you cross-sell, upsell them, etc. So product innovators could be software companies, could be financial services companies. Customer relationship management companies could also be financial services companies. For example, private clients, so wealthy clients with a high net worth, high value, obviously want to be pampered, or the banks, the financial services companies want to pamper them, etc. And again, infrastructure, that's the utilities and so forth. When you look at these different business model types, it's not just the economies, the economics of these companies. It is also how they make it happen. So the culture, according to Hagel and Singer, of a product innovator, for example, is employee-centered. So it needs to be a nice place for employees. In particular, you want really capable people, probably willing to pay a pretty penny, meaning high salaries, because your people are where the innovations come from. Hagel and Singer call it creative stars. I'm not so happy about it because research has shown again and again that if you have a toxic culture of a few stars and people who support them, such a company will always be beaten by a more collaborative company in which everyone's happy, because in the diversity of the teams, that's where the innovation is coming from. But that said, the higher the competence and capabilities, including empathy with other people, the better off the product innovator is. If you're a customer relationship company, obviously you want your folks to be customer-centric, highly empathy-driven, thinking about the customer first and all of that. If you're an infrastructure management company, you focus a lot on costs, you keep the salaries down, you standardize, people become cogs in a machine. And so the competition is for the product innovators, is for the talent, for the capable people, for the customer relationship management companies. It's expanding the scope, cross-selling, upselling, etc. And for the infrastructure management companies, it's to take over the other big capital investments and recuperate based on that. So today I covered the idea of a business model as expressed by the business model canvas that we're using in this course, and then we discussed the different components. Center to the business model canvas is the value proposition, which connects the creation of value, the left side of the canvas, with the value capture or appropriation on the right side of the canvas. All of it leading to 9 different components and their interactions. And at the end, we quickly looked at basic types of business models, but there's much more to be said, so this was only rather short. That's it from me today. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope to see you around and next time back in class. Thank you.